Hello everyone, Jules here. Today I'd like to talk about the topic of ancestor work, and I'd also like to talk about two books and a tarot deck that I like to use for ancestor work. So the first book is called Healing Ancestral Karma, and the subtitle is Free Yourself from Unhealthy Family Patterns, and this is written by Stephen Farmer. And I'm quite keen on this book because it's a bit of a combination of a psychological approach combined with a spiritual approach. So there's not many books like this. You tend to get quite a few books that are written from a psychological or a spiritual approach, but this one has some of each in here, so it's really good. Stephen Farmer is quite well known in the spiritual community and has been for a long time. He's actually a qualified psychotherapist, so that's really good for this type of book. I really like this book, even though there's a lot of books that are written on this topic these days. When I first started reading some of these books over a period of a few years, there weren't that many books available, but there's more books available on this topic now, so that's quite good. There's different ones to choose from, but I particularly like this one because it's coming from both approaches. I'll give you an idea of what's in this book. I find this book really useful. I think it's because it just covers so many things. It covers a really wide area. It covers a lot of aspects of ancestor work that are not always considered. There's quite a lot of books that mention having an ancestral altar, for example. That's quite common. There's also books that talk about ritual. That's also relatively common. And there's more books now that are talking about using divination methods. And they all seem to be separate type of books, but this one covers a lot of extra aspects in here. So it's in 3 parts. The first part is called Getting Acquainted with the Ancestors. So that covers some things like cultural views and practices, which is really good to know about and keep in mind, because cultural views and practices can vary a lot all over the world. So I think that's a really good thing to keep in mind. Everyone's going to be doing this differently. This video I'm making today, these are some of the resources that I like to use. So I'm really just talking about this just from my perspective. He talks about 3 types of ancestors, so he defines that. I think that's really good too. And in part 2, that's called Making Contact with the Ancestors. One of the chapters is called Perceiving Spiritual Messengers. And he's even got a chapter after that called Blocks to Perceiving and Receiving these messages. Now, he talks about something here that I think is really relevant: energy, DNA, and ancestors. I find energy and DNA really quite relevant in regard to ancestor work. I have always sort of seen it like that, or have felt the whole of ancestor work is all about energy and DNA. I know there's different types of ancestors, and he does define that earlier in the book about different types of ancestors that are not like blood ancestors. But when you're thinking about blood ancestry, I think energy is one thing, and so is DNA. He's got a chapter on visiting graves, and in particularly a parent's grave. He even has a chapter here on automatic writing. You don't see that in these types of books very often, so that's great. That's why I particularly like this book. I like the way it's written, I like the topics that are in here. Now for part 3. This is healing ancestral family patterns. And I think this is one of the most important areas to do with ancestor work. One of the first chapters in here is about trauma and post-traumatic stress disorder. Now, for people who don't know this, family patterns and particularly intergenerational trauma and childhood trauma are very much to do with complex post-traumatic stress disorder. So it's PTSD with a capital C in front of that. In recent years, it has been discovered by psychologists that there is a particular type of post-traumatic stress disorder, and that's why they're calling it complex, that is definitely to do with family and or childhood trauma. So I'm really glad that's finally been recognised. Family secrets. Family secrets is a very big issue in ancestor work, especially if you decide to do research on your family tree. There can be lots of things that you didn't know and that possibly you don't particularly want to know, or you're sorry that you found out. But if you're going to do family research, you need to be at least partly prepared for that. And then he's got a chapter called treatment modalities, and by that he means different methods. And he's used the word treatment, but I don't really see it necessarily. I mean, it would be a treatment if it is a conventional psychological recognised treatment. I think of more this as a therapy methods. Then there are guidelines, which I think is a good idea, guidelines for healing ancestral karma, and energy healing for an ancestor. Now, that is also something that's not normally seen in these types of books. And a very important chapter on intergenerational healing. I think anyone who does family history research, or anyone who just reads these types of books, and also the latest psychological research, will know that intergenerational trauma is actually far more widespread and common than previously thought. So intergenerational healing in regard to intergenerational trauma is a really important aspect. So there's just some of the things in this book. I really like this book. I love the way it's written. It's approachable, it's useful, and it covers a lot of things, as I said, that are not normally in these types of books. So I really like this book. Healing Ancestral Karma by Stephen Farmer. So that's the first book. The second book may not be all that well known either, but it's a great book. The Cauldron of Memory by Grimassi. The subtitle is Retrieving Ancestral Knowledge and Wisdom. This was published by Llewellyn in about 2009. Another great book that I really like. Even just reading the introduction to this book is really worthwhile. I think it's one of the best books that Grimassi wrote. I have a few books by Grimassi. This is one of my favourite books. In regard to Ancestor Work, I think it's perfect for that. And on the back of the book it says, an inward journey to rediscover your ancestral spirit. So I'll give you an idea of what's in this book too. This book does have some illustrations in here. So I'll give you an idea of what's in this book. This book, of course, is more kind of witchcraft based, but you don't have to use it in that way if you wish, if you are more of just a spiritual or pagan person. But I'll give you an idea of what's in this book. The first chapter is called In Search of the Cauldron. So he's defining what the cauldron is in this context. He even describes different kinds of cauldrons because mythology fits into all this. And I don't know about you, but I've really only ever heard of the cauldron of regeneration, something like the cauldron of plenty. That I haven't heard of that many different cauldrons that are related to mythology, but he mentions at least 6 in this book, so it's really great. Chapter 3 is called The Inner Tradition, so I think that's a great idea to look at this as inner work. This is a book about inner work as well as ancestor work, and ancestry and DNA is very much an inner it's an inner context, so it should be considered rather than the ancestors being outside of us. Chapter 4 is ancestral memory and how to access that, and he talks about DNA with that too. Chapter 5 is called The Stone of Remembrance. Chapter 6 is Chords of Connection. So he's talking about chord work and how to do chord work and how this all fits in. Chapter 7 is the spirit journey. Chapter 9 is the cauldron within. Chapter 10 is, these are different methods, retrieving ancestral memory. I really like this book. I've always liked this book. It was published in 2009. I'm pretty sure you can still get this book. I hope you can. Otherwise you can get this on Amazon as a second-hand copy. But it is a really great book. It's from a spiritual, I'm going to call it a pagan perspective, but it's definitely a witchcraft or folk witchcraft for people who practice that. So it's a great book. This is a great book for ancestor work, Cauldron of Memory by Grimassi. Now the choice of deck that I'm going to talk about here. Oh, one more thing I want to mention. With the different methods in here, Grimassi, amongst other things, does talk about the skull, and he talks about having, a replica that you want to use. So you could use something like this. There's different types. There's a crystal skull you could use. This one's made of resin. You know, you can just have your own skull replica. So that's just something I wanted to mention. Now to talk about, just to show a few cards from a deck that I really connect with from an ancestral point of view. And like I said, this deck may surprise a few people, but kind of surprised me. I found myself quite attracted to this deck, and I'm able to connect with it quite easily. It really surprised me. This is a deck that was published last year, and that is the Witch Sister Tarot by Julia Jeffrey. I'm only going to show some cards here that I particularly like. This has been reviewed many times in recent months, so I don't need to do a review. But I found myself quite drawn to this deck. I don't identify as a witch, but it was the images of this deck that very much attracted me, and it took me a few months to decide to get this deck. I was attracted and drawn to the deck, and it probably took me a little while to sort of understand why. This deck in particular is useful for me because my grandmother was from the far north of England, right on the Scottish border. And I really do think that is why this deck particularly draws me in and is being really useful for me for Ancestor Work. Julia Jeffrey says in the introduction to the book that this includes Celtic lore. So for people who have Celtic ancestors as well, this deck is also good for that. So I'm just going to show some images that I particularly like and find really useful for ancestral connection. This is the Hermit card. I just love this deck. As soon as I got this deck and looked at the cards, I just connected with it straight away. And I do have the Hidden Realm deck, the first edition, at the time when the Llewellyn cardstock was still good. And I like the Hidden Realm. I think it's really lovely deck, but I did have a little bit of trouble connecting with that deck, but I do like it. But this one, it was like automatic, and it really surprised me. So, this image, really love this image as well. This image is also a reminder that our female ancestors from the past, when you were a single woman, were called spinsters, particularly in the United Kingdom, and that tradition continued in Australia, where I'm from. You were just, for many, many years, decades, single women were officially referred to, or legally referred to, as spinsters. So that is because one of the earliest occupations or everyday life was involved with spinning craft. That's what ordinary women did. So that is called the spinner of threads, which is normally the wheel or Wheel of Fortune card. I love this death card. It says everything. This is the passing of time, the passage of time, the two sides of life, being in the prime of life, compared with approaching the end of life. I really like this. And it's sort of showing the connection that's always there with life and death. Whatever is born will die. So I really like this for the death card. I like this card too. This is Justice. These are the minor arcana now, but these are just images that I really like or love the most from the deck. And I know there's a lot of talk these days about the crone stage. I actually, at my stage now, I see myself as an elder. I actually see my mother as a crone who is nearing the end of her life. For me, I'm not at that last sort of ending years of life. I see myself as an elder. That's my personal opinion on that. For me. Beautiful King of Cups, or King of Water, it's called in this deck. This is divided into the elements. Beautiful card. I love this card too. This is the Nine of Waters. So this is self-reflection. This is all about childhood. This is called Flow, which is normally the Temperance card. Ancestry is about children too. It's about the whole lifespan. It's about children and childhood. Really beautiful, these images. But as I said, I just instantly connected. So, and I'm finding it a great deck for Ancestor Work. This is a great card. This is Ancient Starlight, which is normally the Star card. I probably like this image the most of the whole deck. I really like this one. Such a haunting image, and I mean that in a good sense. Oh, it's very memorable. This is the King of Skies, which is the King of Air. I like this too. This is the Ten of Skies. And this card in particular reminds me of the crone stage that my mother is at now. Very much. That's the other thing I love about this deck. There's a lot of older stage people in this deck. I think that may have been one of the first things that caught my attention, because there are just so many decks that are all about youth and the prime of life, when there's a sizable number of people who are at the last third of their lives. They're past middle age, and there are just not enough of those decks. I hope that changes, but at the moment it's all about youth and prime of life for the images and representation. I hope that changes. I mean, there's a lot of diversity in cards and decks now, but age has not been very well included so far. Hasn't been very well represented so far. I hope it changes. And to finish, the Ten of Waters. Another very memorable image. You've got the Cauldron here. Which looks like the Cauldron of memory. So there's some of the images from the Witch Sister Tarot that I find really useful and very supportive for ancestor work. I'm going to put some details below the video about the deck and the two books for people who are interested. And I just wanted to show these things and talk about the resources that I like to use and some of my ideas about ancestor work. But thanks for watching. Bye for now.